Here we go with a set of notes on what I like to call higher invertebrates. I put it in quotes because I don't want to imply that they're better or more evolved than other things, or just as evolved. They've been evolving for just as long. These guys are definitely a little bit more complicated, I guess you could say. They're going to answer yes to pretty much all the questions that we would have asked of the quote-unquote lower invertebrates. Right? They're all going to have bilateral symmetry. They're all going to have a body cavity, a true coelom. They're going to have multiple organ systems, 3 tissue layers, things like that. And we're going to look at 2 major groups of invertebrates in this set of notes. We're going to look at echinoderms and we're going to look at arthropods. Let's begin with the echinoderms. Echinoderms literally means spiny skin. Echine means spine, derm means skin. So that would be one of the main features of these different organisms. It's a pretty diverse phylum, and it contains a lot of organisms you might not have necessarily known were organisms. Probably the most recognizable echinoderm would of course be the sea star, or sometimes called the starfish. This would also include sea urchins, like these guys up here, and then sand dollars, which are actually living organisms as well, not just seashells that you buy at the seashore. Some of the vital characteristics of this phylum, as far as symmetry goes, a little bit unique. Most of the adults have radial symmetry, but their larvae have bilateral symmetry. And then, of course, they do have 3 tissue layers, they do have segmentation, and they do have some organ systems, but they also have some very unique organ systems. They have a nerve ring, which basically means that they don't have a brain, they don't have any cephalization, but they do have a ring that runs around on the inside somewhere. And kind of the unique thing about these guys is if they were to get cut in half or broken apart, any bit or any piece that breaks off and has part of that nerve ring could actually regrow into a whole new organism. So if you lost an arm, you could replace that arm, or if you split like a sea star in half, it could actually grow back into 2 new sea stars. And then they also have the water vascular system. This is unique to this phylum. This is the only phylum in the world that has this water vascular system, and it basically takes the place of all the other organ systems. It's kind of like hydraulics on the inside that powers their tube feet and lets them move around, but also delivers oxygen and nutrients to all the different parts of their bodies, like their reproductive system and digestive system and things like that. The next group that we're going to look at are the arthropods. This is a very, very diverse phylum. About 3/4 of all animal species are arthropods, so most animals are actually arthropods. They, of course, like I said, have bilateral symmetry, 3 tissue layers, and of course they do have a segmented body and a true body cavity. They're coelomates. The word arthropod literally means jointed appendages or jointed foot. Think of arth being like arthritis, is when you have the swollen joints, and pod means foot. So arthropods all have jointed appendages. They also have an exoskeleton made out of chitins. This provides armor for them and supports their body. They do have cephalization. They do have a well-defined head, and they have a ventral nerve cord. So remember, ventral means it runs along the belly side of the organism. They have an open circulatory system, which we've talked about before as usually limiting the amount of mobility an organism might have, but they have some systems to help overcome that we'll talk about a little bit later. And another key feature of arthropods is they have that compound eye that we've talked about before. We have many, many, many lenses. You don't have to write anything down from this slide, but I just put it up here so you guys can get an idea of the diversity of phylum Arthropoda. So if you look up here starting at the top, so all these things are going to be arthropods. This is divided up into a subphylum. Some of the subphylums that we're actually going to be looking at are Chelicerata, Myriapoda, and Hexapoda. We look at Crustacea a little bit more in marine biology. But some of the more recognizable names for you guys, at least, might be their classes. So these guys are class Arachnidae. So the arachnids, spiders, ticks, horseshoe crabs are actually arachnids. Myriapoda means many feet. These guys are the centipedes, millipedes. Class Insecta, of course, the insects, which you're highly familiar with. And then some of the examples of some of the crustaceans, shrimp, crab, lobsters, those guys are all crustaceans, as well as copepods, these little guys that live in the sea, very, very important organisms. Even barnacles, these things that are like crusty things that are on the sides of rocks. They look like they might be mollusks, but they're not. They're barnacles. The first group of arthropods that I want to look at are insects. Remember, this is class Insecta within subphylum Hexapoda because they have 6 legs. and then these, of course, are still arthropods. They do have a segmented body. These guys have 3 body segments. They have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And they also have antennae, and of course they have that compound eye. When we look at their respiratory system, we can see how they can get away with having an open circulatory system. They have basically spiracles, which lead to tracheal tubes. Think of trachea as your windpipe, basically. And so basically what that looks like is you've got holes all throughout the body. And then these holes, here's one right there, are connected to these tracheal tubes. So even though the blood is not contained in a blood vessel all the time, there's just blood squishing around in here, is there's basically these tracheal tubes all throughout the organism. So wherever the blood is going, it always has oxygen diffusing into it and carbon dioxide diffusing out. So instead of keeping their lungs all in one spot, it's like they're getting oxygen all throughout their body. So even though the blood is just in the body cavity, it's still getting oxygen all over the place, so it can overcome the downsides of an open circulatory system. For the excretory system, they have these things called Malpighian tubules. So this is, again, like a primitive kidney to help remove waste. And then just a key part of their digestive system, they have a crop and a gizzard, just like the earthworm did. So I think it's kind of neat to note that they have some similarities there. They do have a brain, cerebral ganglion, and a ventral nerve cord running along here. The next group of arthropods that we're going to look at are the arachnids. So these guys characteristically have 2 body segments and 8 legs, which you guys are probably familiar with. Their 2 body segments, of course, they have the abdomen here, and then instead of having a head and a thorax, they're sort of combined into one segment. We call that the cephalothorax. So they have cephalization, well-defined head, that's combined with their chest. So some similarities and differences compared to the insects. For their respiratory system, they don't have the tracheal tubes, they have book lungs, so they do have a more of a centralized spot. Looks kind of like the pages of a book, that's why they're called book lungs. But just like the insects, they also have those Malpighian tubules, so they have that in common with the other guys. And then some of the other systems, of course, they do still breathe through the spiracles, even though they don't have the tracheal tubes. They have those in common in their full digestive system and circulatory system and all that stuff. And then finally, the last group we're going to talk about is subphylum Myriapoda. These are the centipedes and the millipedes. Literally means many legs, right? Myria means many, like you have a myriad of options, means many, and again, pod means legs or feet again, so many legs. The difference between these guys, basically, is that a centipede has 1 pair of legs per segment. They don't actually have 100 feet. And then millipedes have 2 pairs of legs per segment, and they don't actually have 1,000 legs. But it just kind of seems like that at first, or at least to the people who named them. And with that, we are done with our different groups of higher invertebrates.